Hey everyone, welcome back to the Whispers of Terror channel, where we delve into those spine-chilling stories that keep you up at night. For those dealing with mysterious creatures, if any of you are reading this, why do you do it? Besides the money, I feel like many of you are in it for the thrill, for the adrenaline rush. But where's the line? When does excitement turn into terror? Don't get me wrong, a little risk is good for the soul, but in any situation, there's just too much that can go wrong. Especially when you find the corpse of the mysterious creature you were hunting, dissected and mutilated, and suddenly realize there's an even bigger threat out there. For those dealing with mysterious creatures, if any of you are reading this, why do you do it? Besides money, I think a lot of you do it for the thrill, the adrenaline rush. But where's the line? When does excitement turn into panic? Don't get me wrong, a little risk is good for the soul, but there are too many things that can go wrong in any situation. Especially when you find the body of the mysterious creature you're hunting, gutted and dismembered, and you suddenly realize there's an even bigger threat. My grandpa was pretty crazy about monster hunting, but he was really a madman. Once he hunted a grizzly bear with just a crossbow, mud, and leaves. He hung the bear's head above the fireplace in his forest cabin, and it's been there ever since. I can't express how deeply he loved the wilderness, but I know he got tired of city life very early. Before he retired from his job as an urban engineer, he had already moved to an old house in the northwest corner of the Olympic National Forest in Washington state, about 40 miles from the park. I can only imagine how lonely it must have been for him to live there alone, but he didn't seem to mind. In recent years, I've gotten close with a friend I met in college, Martin. When it comes to outdoor activities, I could see the same fire in his eyes as my grandpa's. He always pestered me to go camping, fishing, hunting, and so on. It made sense to take him to see my grandpa. Honestly, I was worried they might get along too well, and Martin might never come back with me. But in the end, it didn't matter because from that day on, we both had a morbid aversion to the forest. This time, Martin was particularly excited, almost bouncing in the passenger seat of my Jeep. On our last trip, Grandpa promised to teach him the skills of skinning and handling game. Martin often said he wanted to sit by the fireplace with a big deer skin rug under his feet. My motivation was simple, just to check on Grandpa. He hadn't responded to my messages for a week, so naturally, I was a bit worried. As we drove down the long dirt road to Grandpa's house, we quickly ran into trouble. I slammed on the brakes, seeing a row of fallen trees blocking the road. "What the hell happened here?" Martin shouted. "There hasn't been a storm recently, right?" I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel. "The weather's been clear since March." "Strange." I turned off the engine and got out of the car. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the spring breeze, the white noise of nature. We were a little over 2 miles from the house. An easy walk. Grandpa had enough gear, so we didn't need to bring much. Our bags were light. I had my phone, flashlight, water, spare clothes, and a multi-tool watch strapped to my wrist. My plan was to get to Grandpa's house, take his truck back, and use a chainsaw to cut through the fallen trees. We thought it would be more fun to walk through the forest along the trail. The dirt road would just be boring. So we went down the slope on the left and started our journey, keeping an eye on the road to track our direction. A few minutes later, a stench hit us, the smell of rotting flesh. In the forest, animal deaths are expected, but even so, my brain was repulsed by the smell. "Something's rotting here," I said. "Imagine what it would smell like in summer." Martin gagged but agreed. The smell got stronger as we walked, reaching a peak when I almost tripped over a sharp object on the ground. At first, I thought it was a pile of branches, but soon I saw the pale ceramic-like reflection. A severed buck's head lay in front of us, but it was off. The teeth were too long, the facial bones exposed. Despite the stench, I could see the black viscous blood seeping from its neck and mouth. It was fresh. Martin spoke up. "This is so weird. Do you think a bear did this? There are only black bears here, right? I doubt they could do this. Maybe a cougar? I don't know. I've never seen a deer head so cleanly severed." My eyes were drawn to the trail of blood on the ground, leading to the deer's body. From a distance, it looked like a quadruped, but as we got closer, I realized I was terribly wrong. It was a monster's body, huge, gaunt, with knife-like claws lying on the ground like kitchen knives, covered in patches of dark fur. "Is this okay?" Martin approached from behind, taking a look. Seeing it, he fell silent like me. No words could describe the sight. I'd heard horror stories from deep in the forest, but never seen one with my own eyes. It lay there quietly, dead like fallen leaves. It looked crushed and broken, covered in what seemed to be wide and deep puncture wounds. Martin finally spoke. "This is..." But before he could say more, a sudden snapping sound broke the tension. A broken branch. No, a tree trunk. My spine stiffened. Against my better judgment, my head slowly turned towards the sound. In my peripheral vision, I caught a glimpse of a massive silhouette. I quickly turned to face it, only catching a momentary glimpse of long limbs covered in fur like pine bark, but when I turned quickly, the image was gone. Fear threatened to make me scream. I looked around but saw nothing. "Keller, was that?" "Wait, is there a cougar nearby?" Martin whispered. "No, there's nothing. Let's keep moving. We'll tell Grandpa about this, but there might be a big cat nearby. We shouldn't stay in one place too long." Before moving on, I took a few photos of the mangled body with my phone, zooming in on the head without looking back for a better angle. Something told me that even a brief glance back would be a terrible mistake. We moved forward nervously, pretending to ignore the heavy movements between the trees. Big animals inevitably make noise, but they break branches, not whole trunks. Despite the noise sounding anything but clumsy, it now seemed purposeful, like a stalking predator. I tried to filter out the sounds, but I found myself frequently looking to the sides and behind, not knowing if I wanted to see something or not. But there was no one else in the forest but us. "Hey Keller, there are mountain lions here. We should stay on the road for a while. It'll be easier to run if we need to." I agreed, and we turned right, climbing the slope to the road. Deep down I knew it wasn't a big cat out there. We were just fooling ourselves. Avoiding the monster topic made it very real for us. The forest quieted down as we walked along the road, which was not reassuring. If the woods are quiet, predators are near, a well-known thought among outdoor enthusiasts. What gave me a bit of relief was seeing a herd of deer standing on the road, tilting their heads to look at us, but seemingly unperturbed. Meanwhile, the feeling of exposure and vulnerability grew inside me. As we approached, they started moving, leaving the road and entering the woods. One deer stayed behind, not frozen but bound, twitching and whimpering as it began to rise as if weightless. It happened too fast. Its scream cut off, limbs breaking and crushing, deep wounds erupting on its body. Then it appeared as if it had always been there, a nightmare, huge, unimaginably massive, like two elephants stacked together. It hunched over, giant forelimbs supporting impossibly long and thick claws, the body also long, ending in a pair of shorter hind limbs, knees bent inward, feet supported by spike-like appendages. The head on its curved neck looked like a bizarre mix of a horse and a crocodile, hollow eye sockets, torn skin around the mouth exposing horrifyingly uneven and misshapen teeth jutting out at various angles. The twilight glow flickered in the long gashes on its body. The earlier dead creature had clearly put up a fierce fight, but was nowhere near enough to ultimately defeat this monster. As we were stunned, it returned our gaze, the only actual movement being some rib-like appendages on its abdomen moving, turning the deer into a shredded bag of meat and bones. The poor animal withered before our eyes, those pointed ribs stabbing deeper, like a juice box being squeezed for the last drop. At that moment, we became part of the herd, paralyzed. Some had already fled, but others stood like statues before this monster. Another smell hit, worse than the previous corpse stench, but equally nauseating, like wet earth, sulfur, methane, and dead fish. Its source was obvious, thick smoke billowing from the monster's mouth, rising into the evening sky. As the deer's remains hit the ground with a thud, the tension broke. The remaining deer panicked and fled into the trees, the monster responding by rising, turning its head in their direction. Its head seemed off, awkward when turning. I took a step back, emitting a deep and piercing roar, then charged at the deer herd, for shaking violently, smashing a tree, but completely unafraid. We waited until the sound of its rapid run faded into the quickly darkening night before speaking. What was that thing?" Martin's voice was tearful. "I don't know, man, but we need to get to the house before sunset. I have a feeling we won't be able to escape in the dark. Are you crazy? We need to go back. I want to get as far away from this place as possible. What about my grandpa? We can't leave him there alone." Martin didn't look at me but didn't argue, immediately running along the road. We were halfway there, not far from Grandpa's house. Even if we wanted to escape, that monster could easily knock the Jeep off the road. The distant solitary light, like the gates of heaven, exuded a sense of safety, but I knew we couldn't stay exposed, completely vulnerable. I looked at my watch, noting the direction of the house, northeast, then grabbed Martin's arm, leading him off the road to the left. Naturally, the terrain was steep and the underbrush thick. The house's light quickly disappeared, leaving only our direction to navigate. For a moment, I thought we were lost, but I saw a column of smoke above the treetops in the distance. It could only be from Grandpa's chimney. "Quick, this way." The only light gradually appeared. Maybe he had already gone to bed. The lack of contact left me guessing. We finally climbed to the top of the hill, looking at the clearing in the flat ground, but there was no house. The smoke column was there, but no source. As we stood watching, the point of the smoke column wavered in the air. When I smelled that familiar scent, I immediately realized, just like before, it was there watching us. Thick smoke spewed from its mouth, and this time I noticed something else. As the moonlight hung high in the sky, underneath the creature's head, something was glistening, 6 black spheres, as smooth as obsidian, 3 on each side of its neck, moving independently. I immediately knew what they were. What kind of monster is this? If those were its eyes and it used a rib-like structure to eat the deer, it meant it had a fake head, possibly a distraction defense mechanism. This explained why it wobbled limply during the beast's bizarre movements. I quickly blamed myself, then glanced at my watch. We were misled to the east. It was circling us, waiting. I grabbed Martin's shoulder and pulled him in the direction we should go. In a life-and-death sprint, the monster suddenly moved, its rib cage rising and falling with a rumbling sound. Martin looked at me confused. "Hey, man, what are you doing? There's nothing there." "Shut up, run as fast as you can. Don't stop now." Our footsteps matched the heavy thuds and the sound of trees being smashed. I didn't dare look back, fearing even the slightest pause meant death. Over there. I struggled to see what Martin was talking about until a yellow glow appeared through the trees. We were only a few hundred yards away, but I was surprised the creature hadn't caught up. Even the trees it passed through couldn't stop it. It was almost upon us. I could feel the pressure of its massive body moving through the trees, so close it seemed its claws would tear me to pieces any moment. A life-saving grace appeared to our left, a dense grove of old oak trees. I turned towards them, jumping through the gaps between trunks, just enough space for us to pass. I fell to the ground, rolling to the side, not even having time to be stunned as a loud crash sounded from where we had just been. I crawled back, seeing a giant arm reaching through the gap, thick but not as thick as the oaks, claws groping blindly for our fragile bodies. "Go!" I shouted. We both immediately got up and ran towards the light. As we ran, the sounds faded away. Was it thunder? Did it think we were behind those trees? I didn't care. What mattered was being inside the house, not outside. Gravel crunched in front of the house. We stopped. I knocked on the door, and on the 20th knock, my fist hit air. I stumbled through the now open door, looking up to see Grandpa's wild eyes, not looking like himself. He looked at Martin and me, then behind him, seeing something that made his pupils contract. "Get in, kids," he whispered. We filed in, and he went to lock the door but hesitated, his hand dropping weakly. It was useless. He was right. If that monster wanted to visit, no family security would stop it. We followed him silently to an uncovered floor hatch. "What's this, Mr. Barnett?" Martin asked, pointing at the hatch. "Oh, it's my old wine cellar." Martin wanted to ask more questions but was cut off. "Down the ladder, kids. You can ask questions once we're safe." He pulled a handle, opening the hatch to reveal a sturdy wooden ladder leading to a dim space below. We climbed down the dusty ladder one by one, meeting the cold concrete floor at the bottom. Grandpa came down last, pulling a heavy rug over the hatch, then closing and securing it. "You saw that thing, didn't you?" "God, Grandpa, we barely escaped," I said, still panting. "Not hurt, are you?" "Mostly just some scrapes." "Good." He sat on a toppled crate, Martin and I exchanging glances before looking back at him. "Well," Martin said, "you seem to know what we're dealing with, so what is it?" Grandpa gave Martin a disapproving look, quickly understanding. "I should scold you for your manners, kid, but now's not the time." He sighed, lowering his head, then took a deep breath, looking at us. "I only saw it once in college. Some Danish friends said I should visit them for a hike in their country. Denmark's scenery is beautiful, with peaks rising from the trees." Before he got lost in a daydream, I cleared my throat, pulling him back to reality. "Oh, right, we were deep in the forest, all paranoid, feeling something was stalking us, maybe a big moose, but we saw nothing, just heard sounds. Then, God, a girl ahead of us started floating up, grabbed by something, lifted into the air. Whatever it was, it mangled her, squeezing her like a meatball. Then I saw it, twisted bones wrapping around her, piercing deeply. That sight I'll never forget, like a stain in my mind." "We saw the same thing," Martin interjected. "Except it was a deer, looked like it drained everything from the deer when it was done. I can't explain how it works, only that you can see it if you know it's there, if it's there." Anyway, we ran back to the trail as fast as we could, seemed like we lost it. The whole time there was a stench, like rotten eggs and dirt, ugh. We got back to the town we started from, went straight to the police. They found almost nothing, just a small piece of meat, maybe part of a thigh. Later, A guy told me a story, said the smoke we saw in the forest. An old Danish legend said people who saw smoke in the forest most never came back after checking it out. They said it moved around, not spreading like fire, but wandering. Grandpa, that's a scary story. It doesn't help us figure out what it is, and we already know what you just said. Well, I'm sure it has many names because it can appear anywhere, but I've only heard it called chimney beast, if I remember right, meaning chimney monster. That makes sense. We thought we saw smoke from your chimney, but it led us to it. Grandpa sighed. This house doesn't have a chimney. Martin scoffed at me, then looked back at Grandpa. So it lures people? Of course, but I don't think it does it on purpose. I guess it started smoking after eating that deer. Right, I replied. Whatever that thing is, it's not from here. I don't think it belongs to this planet. It eats something, then starts smoking. It's digestion waste gas. So it's fart gas. Martin laughed. He always found a bit of lightness in bad situations, even just a little. I looked up at the monotonous ceiling above us, pondering Grandpa's words. I remembered how it all started. I took out my phone, opening the photos. We found this on our way to your house. I have a guess, but do you know what this is, Grandpa? Grandpa squinted at the screen, then took the phone from my hand. Swipe right, that's just the head, I said. His silence was only broken by the sound of his fingers tapping the screen. Recognizing it, his eyes lit up, nodding. Oh, God, it's Wendigo, right? I asked. Yes, I have to say, I've never seen one in these parts, but then again, I never looked. I doubt you need it, but keep it as a reminder of the monster's abilities. I put the phone back in my pocket, sighed, resting my chin on my hand. In any other situation, I'd be shocked to discover such a creature was real, but not now. That's great, Mr. Barnett, Martin said uneasily. But it doesn't help us. What do we do? I mean, what can we do? I don't know. Well, I have a stupid idea, but it's grasping at straws, better than sitting here waiting to die. Martin breathed heavily, staring into space. Anything. Grandpa looked at the basement window, the only source of natural light in the room, little light remaining. Well, about 600 or 700 yards east in the woods, I saw a stain. I don't know how to describe it, but that's the best word I can use. Looking at it, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Staring too long hurt my eyes. Never saw anything like it. Started seeing it after the chimney beast. He paused, struggling for words. So? I urged, leaning forward, filled with anticipation. It's a guess, but I think that's where it came from. I threw a rock there, but didn't hear it land, like it went somewhere else. If we can lure it back there, make it go back. Wait, I interrupted. I mean, shouldn't we call someone? Police or the army? What do you think the police will do, huh? A sheriff and rookie in a patrol car against it? Good luck convincing the U.S. military to send Marines. They'll think it's a joke. I shut my mouth, swallowing my next words, letting Grandpa continue his proposal. Either the monster leaves, or we die. I don't even want to talk about trying to drive away. You saw what it did to the trees. Stealth might work, but it's better at it than us, despite its size. I don't want to risk any of your lives. His last words sent chills down my spine. He didn't say it outright, but I began to understand his meaning. Grandpa, you. Don't worry about me, kid. I have a plan, but you need to listen carefully, both of you. Martin and I paid full attention. 123. I propped him up, keeping my position. He unlocked the latch and pushed the window open. I was exhausted from escaping, and Grandpa was heavier than he admitted, but I still lifted him higher until his waist was out, and then he crawled into the dark night by himself. I kept staring at him, even though I heard the sound of claws ripping through something. I forced myself not to look. "All right, I'll make a call in a bit," he panted. "Tell Martin when I do." "Seb, I love you, buddy." "I love you too, Grandpa." My words seemed to trigger some instinct in him, and he gave a hard kick and vanished into the woods, swallowed by the darkness. Martin screamed, jolting me back to reality. I saw him retreating as long claws extended through the broken gap, dragging thick trails of blood, his legs soaked in red. "It got me," he cried. He flipped over and crawled towards me on his stomach, and I rushed over to drag him away as fast as I could. As I let go of his grasp, he collapsed to the ground, staring in shock at his leg, where muscle and bone were exposed, sliced open like butter. His mouth was half open, but no sound came out. I screamed, but it turned into sobs. The monster's arm extended towards the middle of the room, slithering with claws searching for us. Martin and I retreated to the furthest corner, the monster's hand getting closer and closer. Then my pocket vibrated, and I realized a call was coming in, bringing a strange sense of security. I shakily answered, "Grandpa, it's getting close, do something, please." There was no response. A loud crash followed, and the monster's arm recoiled, pausing for a moment before withdrawing from the basement, leaving debris everywhere. I recognized it as his Black Hawk. He came with the Black Hawk. I didn't know when he picked it up. Maybe he always had it on him. I saw a big shadow dart into the woods, matching the speed of my Jeep. When Grandpa suddenly shouted on the phone, I was startled. I quickly wrapped Martin's leg with my jacket and t-shirt as a tourniquet. "Hey, Kyle," Grandpa said on the phone, his voice hollow and metallic, "remember to keep up your aerobic exercises. It gets harder as you get older." I forced a smile. "I will. I want to go hiking, camping, and live off the land with you." "I know you do. God knows I want that too," he said, holding back sobs. "You need to be strong for your mom, okay? I won't make it this time, but you both will." I broke down, tears streaming down my face. "Grandpa, I'm going to miss you so much." "Ah, but we had some good times, didn't we?" "Amazing times. Ending it like this is kinda cool too." A strange comfort washed over me, almost drowning my tears. "Yeah, we did. All right, I'm here now, the smoke. I don't know what I'll find." I could hear the beast roaring on the other end. It was catching up to him, along with its clicking and clattering noises. "I'm going in. Promise me one thing." "What?" "You'll be a good kid, make my daughter proud, that's enough." Then there was a weird noise on the phone, like stones sliding on a frozen lake, followed by a splash that seemed to erase all sound. Then dead silence, until a trembling voice broke through again. "Where are you?" I shouted, begging for any information. "I don't know. It looks like I'm in a tube, some sort of glass tube. I can see everything outside. There are more tubes, branching and splitting, but..." The connection grew weaker, his words trembling and buzzing in my ear. "I'm walking along this tube now. There's a main tube, but it's very big. Not a main tube, there are too many. What is this place?" My brain, exhausted, could only listen to his words, which were cut off by a loud splashing sound, more like a roar. I could only hear his moans, until that hissing sound crawled over my skin again, mixed with audio glitches, but I heard an unexpected voice. It sounded like the monster stuttering and clearing its throat, then it spoke in a weird voice. "Careful, its flow reveals us." The monster spoke with mixed clicking and hissing sounds. Grandpa screamed. The call ended with a high-pitched tone. My hand let go of the phone involuntarily, dropping it to the ground. Picking it up, the display showed call failed. I looked at Martin. He was unconscious but still breathing. The bleeding had stopped, but he needed medical help urgently. Back against the cold wall, I decided to wait until sunrise. Grandpa's plan worked, but there was still a faint sense of uncertainty. As the adrenaline wore off, my limbs hurt like hell, and I struggled until I finally drifted to sleep. I woke up to the warm heat and reddish-orange light on my face, sunlight filtering through the damaged basement hatch. The simple dream dissolved. Martin. I rolled over to see him lying a few feet away. Thank God, he was still breathing. The blood on his left leg had dried, but the wound was still seeping. I decided to let him rest and climbed up the broken ladder into the house, which was mostly in ruins. Almost the entire front of the house was gone, only wooden beams sticking out of the rubble, but everything was quiet, birds singing through the woods into the wreckage. I'd learned that forest animals go quiet when predators are close, but it wasn't until their sounds returned that I noticed. A slight chill still ran down my spine, but I felt safe. Yet I'd also felt that way in the basement until the attack. There was no smoke rising from the woods, no foul smell, but it lingered in my mind. I spent some time searching the relatively intact back part of the house, quicker than I expected. I found Grandpa's truck keys in the corner of the kitchen counter and almost jumped into the old wine cellar, gently shaking Martin until he woke up. He was groggy and confused. "Don't worry, buddy. I'm going to get you home." I supported him with his left arm over my shoulder, helping him to the ladder. It wasn't easy getting him up, but I managed. We limped through the wreckage to the truck and drove off quickly, swerving to avoid fallen logs. The rough ride woke Martin in pain. I apologized but didn't waste any time, getting out to help him off the truck, the smell of death stronger, perhaps from nearby Wendigo bodies bringing back the fear from last night. During the brief walk, I felt completely exposed. We quickly made it through the woods to the Jeep, got in, and left as fast as possible, although Martin was injured, with no signs of the beast. My heart pounded and chest heaved. After a three-point turn, kicking up dust, we drove down the track. We drove to a small police station, and I rushed through the double doors. "Call an ambulance. My friend is hurt." Then I reported a serious animal attack. "Cougar," I told the officer. Grandpa was dragged away in the attack. The ambulance arrived quickly, taking Martin, treating his blood loss, and soon he stabilized at the nearest hospital, staying for a week. A search team was formed to look for Grandpa, but they found nothing. Years have passed since the incident. I've gone through stages of grief, but I'm somewhat whole. Saying Grandpa lives in my memory isn't entirely accurate. I can remember him, our conversations, happy outings, the smell of the fireplace, but no matter how hard I try, I can't recall his face. Even photos are blurry. His grave isn't here, but somewhere else, beyond this world. I'm grateful for his sacrifice, but can't help wondering, did it just save our lives, or how many more threats are out there? Can it relocate? Only Grandpa knew the answers, but just in case, if you see smoke among the trees or smell organic odors in the wilderness, it's best to cancel your trip. Once it's onto you, hope you're as lucky as we were the day Grandpa sacrificed himself. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. This time, we're going to play a game. Ready to experience more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. I was only 13 then, just hitting puberty, thinking I was too old for a game of hide and seek, considering it for little kids. but I didn't say anything because just being with them made me really happy. Being part of these activities gave me immense joy and satisfaction. At that time, the four of us were sitting in Kyle's attic, which you could reach through an old wooden staircase at the north end of his Victorian-style house. The stairs were so old that they would creak under any slight weight, as if they could break at any moment. It was my first time in that room because it used to be piled up with old stuff, barely any room to stand. We had been clearing out old boxes to make space for some play area. It was Kyle's house, or more accurately, his parents' house. Kyle was sitting opposite me on a worn-out rug that covered part of the attic floor. His little sister Adelaide was there too, looking extra excited to play with the older kids. Kyle's girlfriend, Sarah, was also there. Saying I didn't have a crush on Kyle would be a lie. I'd liked him since I was 3 when we moved next door. Our parents became best friends, often spending weekends playing cards in each other's living rooms or grilling in the backyard in their flashy Hawaiian shirts. We naturally became friends, but as we grew up, Kyle grew taller while I just grew wider. I became a chubby teenager, always in denial about my weight problem. Classmates' teasing made it hard to ignore, and my heavy glasses and poor fashion choices didn't help. My extra weight made the attic feel even hotter, and I was sweating while everyone else seemed to enjoy the warmth. "I'm not sure I want to play hide and seek, that's a kid's game," Sarah pouted, flipping her long blonde hair over her shoulder. Her beauty made me feel even more insecure. I wiped sweat from my face, and without my glasses, the room was a blur. I saw Sarah roll her eyes at me, and when my vision cleared, I blushed under her scrutinizing gaze. Adelaide looked very disappointed. She was just 10 and clearly excited about playing the game. She looked at her brother, her voice full of hope. "If you guys don't want to play hide and seek, maybe a board game?" The little girl's voice was hopeful. I looked around the attic and noticed a bunch of board games. Monopoly sounded like fun, and I was pretty good at it. "No, we don't always need to play board games. Let's try something else." Kyle grinned at us. "How about truth or dare?" I got a chill down my spine. That game never went well for me, often leading to embarrassing dares. Like the last time they dared me to run a mile, I couldn't finish, and they all laughed as I sat breathless on the ground, except for Adelaide, who kindly offered me a glass of water. Sarah gave an evil smile. I knew she liked the idea. Adelaide looked at me, frowning. "I don't like that game. Last time Kyle and Sarah made me eat a bug." Kyle let out a sharp laugh, and I tried to glare at him. Adelaide was terrified of bugs, and making her eat one was just cruel. Kyle gave me a mischievous smile, and I couldn't help but blush. He was cute, even when annoying. Sarah came over and gave me a slight push. "Come on, it will be fun. We can set a rule not to make anyone eat or drink gross stuff." That seemed to please Adelaide, who shrugged, "As long as you promise." Sarah crossed her heart, smiling. "I swear, no gross stuff." Eventually, Adelaide nodded, "Then I'm in." I kept quiet, usually just going with the flow. Kyle clapped his hands. "All right, it's decided. I'll start, and then we'll take turns." He looked at me, pointed, and said, "We'll start with you, Lily. Truth or dare?" He crossed his arms, giving me a stern look. I weighed my options. If I chose truth, he could ask something embarrassing, but if I chose dare, I might end up embarrassed too. "Dare," I said, bracing myself for the challenge. Kyle raised an eyebrow, seeming surprised I picked dare over truth. "I dare you to do a split," he said smugly. I shrugged and sat down. This wasn't too bad, at least it wasn't running. For the next minute, everyone laughed as I struggled to do a split. Not being flexible, I barely managed half a split, feeling like my pants would tear. Finally, I stood up, catching my breath. It was my turn. I looked at Sarah, asking, "Sarah, truth or dare?" Sarah rolled her eyes. "Truth." She crossed her arms, waiting for my question. "Do you want to kiss anyone here?" I asked listlessly. It was a lame question, but I couldn't think of anything better. Sarah rolled her eyes again, then gave me that evil smile. "Oh, I've always wanted to give you a big, wet kiss, Lily." She puckered her lips, making an exaggerated kissing face. Everyone laughed, and I tried to laugh along, but it felt forced. This game was turning against me, as usual. When it was Adelaide's turn, she excitedly said, "Me next." Her enthusiasm was adorable, even making Sarah smile a bit. "Do you want truth or dare?" Sarah asked, arms crossed, looking serious. Adelaide jumped up, "Dare." She giggled. Sarah thought for a moment, then shrugged. "I dare you to spin in place really fast." "Too easy," the little girl exclaimed. She raised her arms above her head, pretending to make ballet moves, and spun as fast as she could. She did 3 turns before dizziness knocked her over, tumbling to the side. She giggled uncontrollably, clearly unfazed by the fall. "That wasn't hard. Now I'm going to ask Kyle." She turned to her brother, dramatically asking, "Truth or dare?" Kyle nonchalantly responded, "Dare." "I dare you to do a backflip," Adelaide said confidently. Kyle did just that, leaping onto an old box and perfectly executing a backflip, landing with a loud thud that shook the old floor. I thought our families downstairs would hear, but the sound seemed isolated, and no one came to check. Then it was my turn again. Kyle turned to me, shaking the dust off his face, his flip having stirred up some dust. "All right, Lily, truth or dare?" he asked again, giving me that intense look. I looked up at the attic ceiling, pretending to think deeply, avoiding eye contact. "Dare," I said finally. The last dare wasn't too bad, so I thought it was a safe choice again. Kyle smirked, pointing at the box he had just jumped off of. "I dare you to stay in that box for 5 minutes." I stared at the box in fear. It looked big enough, but the thought of being trapped inside made me sweat even more. I didn't like tight, enclosed spaces. Even being in a crowded elevator was a challenge for me. Kyle sighed. "Are you up for it or not?" Since he first dared me, I unconsciously started backing away, cautiously eyeing the box. "How long do I have to stay in there?" I tried to sound brave. Kyle quickly glanced at Sarah, who smiled faintly and replied, "I think 5 minutes is fair." I was still hesitant. 5 minutes wasn't long, but the attic was already hot, and the box would be even hotter. Could I back out of this dare? No backing out. Kyle seemed to read my mind. He opened the box lid entirely, revealing it was nearly empty, with some old white fabric at the bottom. Kyle lifted it, showing it to be an antique wedding dress, clearly not from this century but once beautiful. I wondered who had carelessly left such a precious item in an old box. "Weird," Kyle said, tossing the dress back in. "We'll leave it there for you to have something soft to lie on." My throat tightened. Just thinking about entering that box made my heart race. I started to breathe deeply to calm myself, finding it somewhat helpful. Sarah let out a snide laugh, and I glanced at her. She gave me a disdainful look, and I was stunned. "We all know you can't fit in there, Lily. You're too fat." She uncrossed her arms, continuing to glare at me, as if my presence offended her. This only made me more determined, not backing down but angered. What had I done to deserve this? She was always mean to everyone, except Kyle, who seemed immune to her nasty temper. "I'll fit. I just need a breath," I said as firmly as I could. Sarah sneered, crossing her arms again. "I doubt it. Prove me wrong." She smirked at me, not believing I could do it. I took a few deep breaths and walked towards the box. Kyle smiled, fully opening the lid for me. I took off my shoes and stepped into the box, feeling the old silk wedding dress under my bare feet, oddly comforting. Then I squeezed into the box, just barely enough room to curl up on my side. Though I managed to fit inside, my face was covered in dust from the old silk, making me sneeze, my face sweaty and gritty. Adelaide's voice came from out of my sight. I turned my head to say thank you, but the lid suddenly slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. Dust from the lid fell, making me cough. I could hear Sarah and Kyle whispering and giggling outside the box, then silence. I adjusted my position, trying to get comfortable, and closed my eyes. Not like I could see anything anyway. Suddenly, I realized how quiet it was. I could even hear the dust settling on my bare skin. With each breath, the temperature rose, and I took small breaths, trying not to think about the heat, trying to ease my discomfort. Every breath brought the musty smell of the wedding dress, making me nauseous. I started breathing through my mouth, but that didn't help because I could taste it. The taste clung to my tongue, impossible to get rid of, even with a ton of toothpaste. Time passed, and I counted the seconds in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. I kept counting until I was sure enough time had passed, but I still heard nothing outside the box. I waited a few more seconds, then lightly knocked on the lid. "Hey!" I knocked harder, thinking maybe they were talking and didn't hear me, or my knocks weren't loud enough. I knocked even harder, sending dust flying into my sweaty face. "Hey, let me out, it's been long enough." But still, silence. My heart started racing, panic setting in. I was done with this game. They had their fun, but I didn't want to play anymore. They could keep playing, but I was sweating buckets, and my initial excitement was long gone. I turned over to lie on my back, placed my hands on the lid, and pushed with all my might, hoping for the cool attic air, but the lid didn't budge. I pushed again, harder and longer this time, until my arms started shaking. Panic hit me hard, adrenaline surged, and I nearly fainted. I pushed with all my strength, but the lid stayed put. Even with my back against the bottom of the box, I didn't have enough leverage. I knocked again. "Let me out! Let me out!" I yelled, my voice sounding muffled in the dark box, but surely someone would hear me. Reality hit me. They had locked me in the box, planning to keep me there until their cruel sense of humor was satisfied. I might be stuck here forever. I struggled again, my legs tangled in the wedding dress, my big toe hitting the wood painfully. The box shook, but I still couldn't break free. I started crying, actually sobbing, my heart racing, my weak efforts useless. The small space grew hotter, feeling like I was breathing steam. How long could I last? Maybe they were outside, listening and laughing at my desperate pleas. Maybe that's what they wanted, to hear my fear before letting me out. "All right, you win. I'm really scared. Please, I just want out." I kept sobbing, tears and sweat mixing, stinging my eyes. But still, silence outside. No laughter or footsteps. Maybe they had left completely. "Please, I just want to go home." I sobbed again, tears streaming down my cheeks. Then I felt a tiny prickling on my skin. At first, I didn't notice, but as I struggled to free myself, I realized what it was. Tiny bugs crawled on my skin, disturbed from their nest in the old wedding dress. My heart pounded, a new wave of fear hitting me. I screamed again, louder. I hated bugs of any kind, always needing my parents to catch them for me when I was little, but now there was no escape. They crawled over my bare arms and neck, fearlessly across my face, making a new home in my tangled hair. I could even feel them on my lips. I kept my mouth shut, but I could still feel their tiny antennae brushing my trembling lips. Oh God, this is unbearable. I prayed silently, screaming inside, too scared to open my mouth, fearing they would crawl inside me. The heat was unbearable, like being trapped in a sauna. I felt dizzy, nauseous, bile rising in my throat. My body started to give in to the heat and pressure. I couldn't help it, I vomited, the acidic liquid having nowhere to go. I started coughing violently, vomiting more, struggling in panic. Finally, I turned to my side, letting the vomit flow out. The bugs on my face moved away from the stench. Even with my eyes closed, I knew I was about to pass out. My head hit the side of the box, and I whimpered, feeling consciousness slip away. When I opened my eyes again, I felt like I was drowning. My vision was blurry, my ears felt stuffed with cotton. I could hear voices but couldn't tell who was speaking. I didn't remember who I was or where I was. Another drop of water hit my face, clearing my vision. I saw my father's face, shouting at me, "Lily, Lily, can you hear me?" He yelled, pouring another cup of water on my face. I opened my mouth, water rushing in, nearly choking me. I looked up at him, still not fully understanding what had happened, only able to nod slightly. I felt the cool linoleum floor beneath my head, like heaven. My overheated brain realized I must be in the downstairs kitchen but didn't know how I got out of the box. "She's alive!" My father shouted, tears in his eyes. He lifted me from the floor, not an easy task, and started carrying me out of the house. I could hear the distant sirens of an approaching ambulance. Someone must have called. I turned my head, seeing Kyle, Sarah, and Adelaide. My vision cleared again, seeing Adelaide crying hysterically, clinging to her mom, her small body shaking with sobs, her cheeks red, eyes shut tight, tears streaming down. But Sarah and Kyle looked both angry and scared. I wanted to say something to them, but I didn't have the chance before being loaded into the ambulance. The next few days, I stayed in a hospital bed, hooked up to IVs to rehydrate, treated for heat stroke, just like kids left in hot cars. The doctors said I was very lucky to be alive. They didn't know how long I had been trapped in the box, but any longer, and the heat could have killed me, or I could have choked on my vomit. I recovered, but the next few days were still weak. When I got home, my parents told me how they found me. They had been silent about it, afraid to bring it up while I was still weak. After locking me in the box, Kyle and Sarah took Adelaide downstairs, telling her they planned to leave me in the box for more than 5 minutes. Sarah wanted to see how long it would take for someone to notice I was missing. Adelaide immediately objected, but they wouldn't let her go back to the attic. As soon as she got a chance, she snuck away and went upstairs. She opened the box, and her screams brought my parents. She thought I was dead when she found me. Kyle and Sarah denied everything. Sarah insisted she and Kyle hadn't seen me all day. Kyle shook his head, saying maybe I locked myself in the box for attention or to frame him. Kyle's parents believed him, despite Adelaide confirming my story. They still thought I was stupid enough to get trapped in the old box by myself. They even demanded we compensate for the ruined wedding dress. However, my parents believed me, ending our family's friendship. Not long after, we moved away, starting fresh in a new town, with no kids whispering behind my back, no Kyle and Sarah spreading rumors about me seeking attention. Since that incident, I hated the heat, triggering severe panic attacks. For years, I slept with the lights on, often dreaming of being strangled by the wedding dress or eaten by bugs. I underwent long-term therapy, but the anger inside never faded. Years later, I returned to my hometown. Finding Kyle wasn't hard, easier than finding Sarah. It took some time to find her. She wasn't particularly happy to see me, especially when she learned I wanted to play another game of truth or dare. But Kyle still lived in that old house. I knocked on the door, and he let me in, not recognizing me after all these years. He only saw a poor girl with a broken-down car outside. Time had been kind to me, but not so much to Kyle. I had grown taller, my fat turned to muscle, while he started balding early, and his belly showed a beer gut. This worried me a bit. The box I brought might not be big enough. Hope you enjoyed this creepy game. Now, we're about to dive into the next thrilling story. Ready to experience more spine-chilling moments together? Let's jump right into the next tale. Ever since my wife left me, I've been feeling really down. At the time, she worked long hours at a law firm and had ambitions of becoming a partner. I was at home writing content for a digital marketing company. Initially, I thought everything was fine. Our lives were busy but stable. However, one day, she suddenly told me she had met someone new, someone driven and ambitious. I was shocked and tried to win her back. I told her I was also driven and ambitious, just needing a break, but she had already made up her mind. That was a terrible day. She packed her bags, moved out of our apartment, and took her things. I was devastated. She was my one and only, the love of my life. In the following weeks, I kept hoping she'd message me, telling me it was all a mistake, but my phone stayed silent. Every time it rang, my heart would race, hoping it was her, but it was always just ads or work emails. I sat in front of the TV with the curtains drawn, living off junk food. My fridge was full of frozen pizzas and soda, the table covered in chips and chocolate. I stopped showering, mechanically sending emails without even knowing what I was typing. Weeks turned into months, and I stopped going out altogether, ordering everything online. Life became a purposeless nightmare, each day passing in endless pain. One Saturday morning, I dragged myself out of bed, looking at the dirty clothes and midnight snack remnants scattered on the floor. It was disgusting, but I didn't care. I bent down to find something to wear and saw a mouse moving, staring at me. I cursed, stepped back, tripped over the clothes, and fell. The mouse watched me go crazy, then walked away nonchalantly. My heart was pounding, and I decided I had to change. Like a man possessed, I cleaned myself and the apartment from top to bottom, filling 24 garbage bags with takeout boxes, mopping, vacuuming, scrubbing the sink and countertops, even throwing out some moldy clothes that couldn't be washed. The rest I washed, ironed, and folded. Now, coming out of the slump, I couldn't believe I'd let things get so disgusting. Feeling much better, I left the apartment and went to an organic food store to buy ingredients for a healthy meal. After eating a bowl of organic porridge, I opened my laptop and decided the next step was to meet new people. I searched for online dating, filtering out those that asked for credit card info up front and some obviously sketchy sites, and started filling out my profile on a legit singles portal. It was easy at first, somewhat like applying for a job. When it came to hobbies, I embellished a bit. My hobbies had been eating junk food, watching TV, and missing my wife, but I couldn't put those in the relevant boxes, so I wrote that I liked gourmet food and classic movies. Though it sounded a bit weak, I could always go back and improve it, plus it was just one of many sites I planned to use to rediscover myself. The profile was almost complete when I clicked next, and things went wrong. The site required me to upload a photo, but only accepted those already on social media. Social media was the last place I wanted to go, full of photos of me and my ex. Seeing them would reopen old wounds, and worse, I might see what my ex was up to now. While I was struggling in pain, she might be posting about her new life and love. Feeling sick, I closed the site without adding any photos. A pop-up message appeared. Are you sure you want to leave the site? You won't be able to find romance. I felt a surge of anger and frustration and exited the site. I tried 3 other similar sites, but at some point, I was always reminded of the past I was trying to leave behind. Online dating was a nightmare I couldn't handle. Feeling dejected, I thought about the pizza places I used to order from daily. They should be open now. An app on my phone could get a 3-cheese deluxe pizza delivered to my door, with some drinks on the side. The idea of binge eating was tempting, but I knew if I gave in, it would be a terrible setback. I decided not to let that happen, closed my laptop, and went for a run for the first time in my life. I didn't change into running gear, just went out in my clothes. I ran to the end of the block, hands on my knees, gasping for breath. I was satisfied with that. It was still a victory. After catching my breath, I decided to take a leisurely walk instead of heading straight back to the apartment. I passed a row of independent shops, one of which was a charity shop selling donated items, with a sign in the window, "Volunteers Wanted." That gave me an idea. Back home, I opened my laptop and searched for volunteer work. I thought it would be a good way to meet new people and have the added benefit of doing something worthwhile. I didn't see myself standing behind a shop counter, but there had to be something suitable for me. Many links appeared on the page, and I made a cup of sugar-free, low-fat milk coffee and started browsing them. Many worthy causes caught my eye, and I sent inquiries about volunteer roles, like helping animal charities, cleaning up downtown parks, and working in community gardens. Just as I was about to end my search for the day, one result caught my attention: helping to save our fire tower. I'd heard of fire towers but had never seen one in person. I was pretty sure they were relics of the past, replaced by modern technology, but I was intrigued enough to click the link. It took me to a group's website that had bought an old fire tower. The tower had been closed 40 years ago and left to decay. The group wanted to restore it and open it as a tourist attraction. They were looking for people to work on the fire tower, which sounded great, so I sent in my information, hoping they'd get back to me soon. After a salad with whole grain bread, I still hadn't heard back from them, so I decided to do some research on my own that evening. The group's website said the fire tower was located in a rural area on the outskirts of my hometown city. I entered the location and saw an aerial image of the fire tower online. The tower itself appeared as a small, in the middle of the forest, clearly once used to monitor forest fires. On the city side of the forest, the trees thinned out, and large estates began to dominate the landscape. I wasn't interested in seeing swimming pools, tennis courts, and helipads, so I moved the view past the fire tower, deeper into the forest. The canopy displayed a beautiful natural scene on the screen, and then the image blurred. I could only make out some vague shapes. Thinking my laptop had an issue, I cleared the cache and restarted it. That's the extent of my tech knowledge. None of it helped. The image remained blurry, so I moved the view 10 miles away, and the details returned. I could see open countryside, a farm, and possibly a tractor. I kept looking in different directions and soon realized it wasn't my laptop or the internet, but oddly, a patch of land that wasn't showing up. If I were a conspiracy theorist, I'd think it was censored for some unsettling reason, like ordinary people weren't allowed to see what was there. I yawned and rubbed my face, realizing it was almost midnight. I had gotten lost in a rabbit hole, thinking about strange things. Smiling to myself, I knew it was another sign I needed to get out more. I closed the tabs on my computer, leaving only my email open, and saw a reply from the Fire Tower group. They said they welcomed me to join them on site to restore the fire tower and added that they were having a social event at a downtown bar on Sunday night, where I could meet some of the group members. I replied that it sounded great and I'd be there. That night, I slept better than I had in a long time. The next evening, in my now orderly bedroom, I picked out a stylish casual shirt and pants, polished my best shoes, and put some gel in my hair, ready to meet the Fire Tower group at the bar. On the subway, I had to admit I was nervous, my stomach churning. I hadn't socialized in a long time, and this was important to me. I told myself everything would be fine, watching the stations go by. The bar was near the subway station, almost empty except for a group of people gathered in a corner. I guessed they were the Fire Tower group. Hoping I still remembered how to talk to real-life people and not just screens, I walked over. It turned out I didn't need to worry. The Fire Tower group members were warm and friendly, a mixed bunch. A guy named Mike was a retired firefighter, though he quickly pointed out that his career was spent at a downtown fire station, never professionally dealing with fire towers. There was also an accountant named Jeff, who handled the group's admin work as a registered volunteer organization. Another guy named Alan worked in PR, and another Alan worked in retail. There were 2 college students, Tony and Nick, and Beth. Beth was about my age, a nurse with long black hair and an infectious laugh that made me want to keep talking to her as the night went on. Her laugh seemed magical, making me feel relaxed and happy. We talked a lot, from our jobs to funny life stories, even our dreams and future plans. Her enthusiasm and kindness gave me an unprecedented sense of warmth and comfort. We talked late into the night, reluctantly parting ways only when the bar was about to close. That night, I returned home feeling unusually lighthearted, as if everything was moving in a positive direction. From that day on, Beth and I stayed in touch and started working together on the fire tower restoration. Every time I saw her, I felt incredibly happy and fulfilled. We cleaned up the tower's trash, repaired broken walls and windows, and even designed the interior decor together. We put our hearts into every detail, hoping to bring new life to the old tower. During this process, our feelings for each other grew stronger. A few months later, the fire tower was finally restored. We held a grand opening ceremony, inviting community residents and volunteers to witness the moment. Looking at the rejuvenated fire tower, I felt immensely proud and satisfied. More importantly, I found a new version of myself through this process, regaining passion and hope for life. And Beth became the most important person in my life. Today, Beth and I are a couple, planning our future together and enjoying every beautiful moment. Looking back on this journey, I feel incredibly grateful and happy. Though I went through pain and lows, those experiences made me stronger and led me to true happiness and a sense of belonging. Life is always full of unknowns and challenges, but as long as we face them bravely, we can always find our own light and hope. I tried to tell her a funny story from my teenage years, but I completely messed it up and just sat there quietly, wishing I'd never opened my mouth. Beth put her hand on my arm and said, "Everything will be okay." Her eyes were full of concern and understanding, as if she could see I'd been going through a rough time lately. I tried hard not to spill the beans about my marriage ending, knowing that despite my social awkwardness, that would be a turn-off. I wanted to talk to Beth about things that genuinely mattered to me, not just these awkward moments. When Jeff mentioned planning a trip to the fire tower next weekend, Maya felt a strange mix of discomfort and happiness. He and Alan had initially planned to go on Saturday, but neither of them could make it. He asked if anyone else could go. Beth leaned in and said, "How about you? We could work together in the tower and get to know each other better." I smiled and replied, "Sounds good." Beth told everyone we'd be happy to take their place. I had a pleasant subway ride, met someone I really liked, and she seemed to feel the same way about me. I went to bed with a smile, thinking the week was dragging on too slowly. I wrote copy for some junk products, ignoring the company's request to work in the office at least 3 days a week. I created a folder named Job Search on my computer. Beth gave me her number at the bar, and I kept writing texts to her but then deleting them because they were too long and enthusiastic. I told myself to stay cool, but a few hours later, I'd start writing long texts again, only to delete them. Finally, Saturday morning arrived, and I rented a car to go to the fire tower. After writing and deleting messages to Beth a dozen times asking if she could pick me up, I set off early to make sure I wouldn't be late. When I arrived at the fire tower, I parked in its shadow and looked up, impressed by its simple yet sturdy wooden structure. The tower's legs stretched into the sky, supporting a viewing platform accessible only by a ladder. The thought of climbing up made me uneasy, but I had to do it, or what would Beth think of me? I took a deep breath, tried to calm myself, and checked my phone, but there was no message from her. I could wait for Beth, or I could overcome my fear and climb up alone. I decided to climb up, so I'd look cool when she arrived. I stepped onto the first rung of the ladder and began to climb. The first few rungs were easy, but then I started to lose my breath, my muscles ached, and sweat poured down my face. Despite my recent diet being good for my body, it couldn't make up for months of laziness. I was struggling with the climb, but I couldn't turn back. The thought of my pleasant interactions with Beth motivated me. Soon, I felt sharp pains in my chest, and my sweaty palms made me worry about losing my grip. I paused, tightened my grip, and made the mistake of looking down. The ground was so far away, and I felt dizzy, like the world was spinning. I closed my eyes, clung to the ladder, and mustered the courage to keep climbing. With my eyes closed, I felt my hands move up rung by rung until I hit an obstacle. I opened my eyes to see the base of the viewing platform, blocked by a hatch. I pushed it, and luckily it opened. I climbed up and lay on the platform floor, limbs spread out, gasping and laughing. I was glad Beth hadn't seen that, but I was proud of myself. I had become the hero of the fire tower. Once I felt better, I stood up and looked around. I saw a lock on the hatch that could be secured from above. The floor seemed sturdy, and a railing surrounded the platform, reaching my chest. In the corner, there were some scattered wood pieces, possibly remnants of tables and chairs from when the tower was in use. A roof supported by thin columns provided some shelter, but the platform was mostly open. Fortunately, it was a clear summer day, offering a view for miles. I turned around to take in the scenery. The tree canopy stretched in all directions, and I could make out clearings between the trees. Recalling an online map, I guessed that the large houses should be to the south. I couldn't see them, but I figured the wealthy residents would be in their home gyms or cinemas over the weekend. I remembered a vague area on the map to the north and planned to ask Beth about it. I hoped she would arrive soon. It was the most beautiful view I'd ever seen, and I wanted to share it with her, tell her how happy I was, and how lovely she was. Maybe she would come up, put her hand on my arm, get closer, and we'd kiss. I smiled, and just then, My phone buzzed with a message. "Hey, the hospital called. I have to cover for a sick colleague today, so I can't make it to the fire tower. Really sorry." I sighed, staring at the screen, as my dreams of spending time with Beth and kissing her vanished. I buried my head in my hands and muttered, "Loser." Then I leaned against the railing, looking up at the roof, wondering if wanting to share life with someone was asking too much. The answer seemed to be yes. I closed my eyes, hugged myself, and fell asleep until my phone rang, waking me. I rubbed my face and looked at the screen. It was Beth. I croaked, "Hey." "Hey, how are you?" she responded. "I'm on my lunch break and wanted to ask if you got the emergency alert. Authorities are asking everyone to stay indoors due to a suspected chemical leak in the area of the fire tower." If I had received the alert, I had slept through it. No," I mumbled, "but you're on your way, right? You're not at the fire tower, are you?" she asked. I stood up, honestly, "No. I got exhausted climbing the ladder and then got your message." I was about to tell her how I felt after getting her message, but something else caught my eye. Far to the north, a plume of smoke was rising. "Are you still there?" Beth's voice came through. "Yeah, I'm here," I replied. "I think I can see the source of the accident. It looks like something happened in that vague area on the map." I should have explained more, but she spoke first. "Oh, ghost town. Tony and Nick believe there's a secret military facility there. I'm not sure, but you should come down and leave." I looked over the railing. The ground was far away. "I think staying here might be safer," I muttered. "If there's a chemical leak, maybe being higher up is better." "I'm not sure either," Beth started to say, but my attention was diverted again. I saw someone stumbling through the woods below. Though too far to see clearly, whoever it was, they weren't just walking, they were fleeing something. I told Beth, "Something's not right here. I'm going to hang up and send you some videos." I hung up before she could shout my name. I was excited because Beth cared about me and called me. I knew we'd soon have drinks together and talk about this weird fire tower incident. Beth and I would be together soon. I picked up my phone and aimed it at the smoke, then leaned over the railing to film the stranger on the ground. I noticed there were more than one. 3 or 4 people were moving through the forest floor. I extended my phone further, trying to focus, to prove to myself that I wasn't a loser, but the phone slipped from my hand, flipping through the air until I lost sight of it. But it must have landed near someone on the ground because they stopped and looked up at me. I stared in their direction as they walked toward the bottom of the ladder and began to climb. This wasn't a problem, I told myself. "Oh, what's that saying? Safety in numbers, that's it." Then others followed suit, climbing the ladder. Maybe they thought staying in the fire tower was safer, just like I had. This moment, for reasons I can't explain, I feel extremely uneasy. I feel exposed, alone, and scared. I walk to the open hatch and look down. The leader is climbing much faster than me and is already halfway up. This makes me think they aren't affected by whatever is making them flee. But as I focus on them, I see their clothes are dirty, their hair and skin are in bad shape, and their hands are filthy, grasping the rungs one by one. My heart tightens. I glance at the hatch cover, considering closing and locking it, but I can't. Now I see clearly, it's a man, and he's obviously in bad shape. As he climbs closer, I can see his skin is not only dirty but damaged. His hands have open wounds. I know I have to help him, not shut him out. I can see others below, frantically climbing the ladder. Not just 3 or 4, but at least 10. The first climber is now only a few rungs away. He hasn't looked up or shouted, just getting closer and closer, close enough for me to reach out and pull him up. "You're almost there," I shout to him, "you're safe now." I want to comfort him because it's the right thing to do. But my voice is tinged with fear, and instead of reaching out, I notice something crawling on his scalp, maggots. I realize, "What's wrong with you?" I ask, my voice trembling. His only response is to look up at me. A wave of revulsion hits me. His face is a horrifying sight, with wounds on his forehead and cheeks, gray, damaged skin hanging down, and parts of his lips missing, exposing his teeth in a ghastly grin. One eye is lifeless, the other a hollow void. My stomach churns, and my legs almost give out. I'm facing a nightmarish scene, his hand about to grasp the edge of the hatch, seconds from reaching the platform, followed by the others. I fight off the fear that threatens to strip me of my sanity and strength, and I kick the hatch cover shut, kneeling to lock it. The hatch starts shaking, and the thing begins pounding on it, a sickening roar rising from below, sounding like a rabid dog but more twisted and wild. Protests and violent shaking ensue. As long as the hatch holds, I'm safe, I think, pacing the platform, desperately searching for another escape. But I can't escape the horror surrounding me, more figures emerging from the forest. I can no longer see the bottom of the ladder, covered by a mass of writhing, roaring things. They still try to drag themselves up, stepping over the deformed corpses. They move with blind rage, and in an instant, I understand what these creatures are. They're zombies, dead and frantically trying to reach me. I shudder, thinking what would happen if they caught me. I glance back at the hatch. Despite everything, it holds, and I still have a chance. Then I see some zombies no longer trying to climb the ladder but scaling the legs of the fire tower, some falling in the frenzy, but others clinging to the wood, getting closer. My inner scream grows louder as a tattered hand appears at the top of the railing, a zombie coming into view. It glares at me, eyes burning with blood-red rage, a low, angry growl escaping its lips. Its face is relatively intact, but as it crosses the railing, I see its intestines are an open wound, gray guts exposed. It lands on the platform and starts stumbling toward me. I back away, nearly tripping over broken furniture. Nowhere to run. If I can't flee, I must fight. I pick up a chair leg, scream, and charge at the zombie, driving the wooden shard into its eye. The zombie screams, staggers back, and finally lies still, death truly taking it. A wave of relief washes over me, a fleeting hope that everything might be okay. Then I see a second zombie about to climb over the railing. I pick up another piece of wood, ready for the next attack. The zombie raises its arms, roaring, and then a sharp sound rings out. The zombie falls face down, blood staining its shattered skull. More sharp sounds follow, weapons firing. I realize the cavalry has arrived, and I lie flat on the deck, not wanting to become collateral damage. It feels like an eternity before the assault stops, the hatch no longer shaking, no zombies climbing the railing. I crawl forward, cautiously peeking over the edge, the ground below littered with zombie remains, soldiers picking them up and tossing them into truck beds. I guess it's cleanup time. I stay low and quiet, waiting for the military unit to finish before descending the ladder, hoping my rental car isn't wrecked. The soldiers work quickly, a sergeant barking orders, trucks pulling away, leaving a jeep and 2 soldiers handling the last boxes. I no longer care about hiding. I survived, and that's what matters, though it seems I can't sneak away. A soldier checks the rental car's window, another points at the deck. I think whatever, forget the details. They'll find only an innocent civilian and 3 zombie corpses. A thought flashes through my mind. I killed one zombie with a chair leg. Soldiers took down the second. Turning around, the third zombie growls, raising its head. I didn't see it climb up during the gunfire, its decayed brain retaining enough sense to hide, playing dead like the truly dead. I think, hysteria rising. The zombie stands, wobbling, staring at me. Between me and the makeshift weapons, soldiers can't climb the ladder fast enough. The zombie steadies, swaying toward me. I raise my hands, pleading, please don't hurt me. The zombie advances, inches away, its rotten breath hot on my skin, mouth open, yellow teeth dripping thick saliva, decayed lips almost touching mine. Not long ago, I dreamed of kissing Beth. Now I'm in a zombie's foul embrace. No! I shout, pushing the zombie, running, hands still on its chest, until we reach the railing. Suddenly, the zombie goes over, crashing headfirst onto the rental car, a sickening crunch. Soldiers turn, looking at the commotion, then up at me, one aiming. I raise my hands, shouting, I'm human. Orders to come down follow. I'm shaking and nauseous, starting down the ladder. Finally, I'm on the ground but still far from safe. Soldiers glare, one keeps an eye on me, another sternly asks, what are you doing here? Volunteering, I stammer, helping fix the fire tower. Soldiers exchange a look, I feel they don't believe my innocence. I try to explain, I was on the deck talking to another volunteer, Beth, on my phone, noticed something wrong, so I filmed the smoke and zombies near the secret military facility until I dropped my phone. I stop, realizing I might have talked my way out of any chance of release, being a loser. A soldier grabs my arm, you're coming with us. I protest, saying it's a free country, they can't do this. But my arm is twisted behind my back, pain silencing me, unable to resist, shoved into the Jeep's back seat. One soldier climbs beside me, another throws the zombie into the trunk, starts the engine, and we drive off. The radio crackles with lively chatter, the Jeep bumps through the woods. I realize it's soldiers communicating between vehicles, excited about eliminating zombies, but to me, they seem undisciplined, worrying about my fate. Detained by country soldiers, my civil rights ignored. Then a new voice on the radio, Alpha 4 calling, we have a problem, a transported zombie wasn't brainshot, trying to enter the cab. Then silence, static crackling, followed by terrible screams, chilling, but the silence more frightening. The soldier beside me curses, we drive on, requests for Alpha 4 status coming through the radio. Minutes later, the driver shouts, up ahead. He brakes hard. I see over his shoulder, a military truck crashed into a tree, engine running, smoke rising from the hood. Stay here, the soldier beside me says, climbing out. The driver follows, approaching the truck. Suddenly it reverses, wheels churning dirt, then turns to face us. My heart races, a zombie in the driver's seat, grinning horribly, engine roaring, truck charging us. The nearest soldier fires, shattering the windshield, the truck veers, screeching to a halt. I see the zombie's glaring eyes disappear, a fresh wound on its forehead, the door shut and locked. I slump to the ground, back against the cold, hard iron bars, hugging my knees tightly. Fear and despair spread within me. Through the gaps in the bars, I could still see the hustle and bustle inside the building, hear the hurried footsteps and the distant hum of machinery. I had become a prisoner and yet a spectator of it all, but that feeling of loneliness didn't last long. I really wished I had stayed at my apartment, watching trash TV and eating pizza, rather than coming to this fire tower I'd never heard of. Then I heard a creepy sound, a low growl. I looked up and saw a zombie being dragged towards the cell, its neck wrapped in a collar attached to a long pole tightly gripped by a soldier. This kind of equipment is usually used to capture and move wild dogs. The zombie struggled wildly, foaming at the mouth and roaring at its restraints, but the soldier managed to shove it into the cell next to mine. An obviously nervous guard opened that cell. The soldier pushed the zombie inside with the pole, shut the cell door, locked it, and then high-fived the guard before leaving. "Wait!" I shouted. "You can't leave me here with this thing." But they just flipped me off and walked away. Through the bars, I stared at the hideous face of my new neighbor, separated only by a few bars. This zombie was wearing a soldier's uniform, and I guessed it must have been turned during the Alpha 4 mission. Maybe that's why they didn't blow its brains out. Whatever the reason, it survived, but it was clearly out of its mind, driven entirely by rage. Saliva sprayed from its cracked lips as it stumbled around the cell, growling, shaking its head, with rage burning in its bloodshot eyes. The zombie didn't seem to notice me, so I tried to stay still, but eventually, I failed. I started shivering all over, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. The zombie in the other cell started snarling, slowly lifting its head to stare at me. It had noticed me now, its bloodshot eyes filled with fury, and it growled again, taking a step towards me. I immediately stood up and backed to the other end of my cell, watching the zombie inch closer. It reached the bars separating us and began violently shaking them, reaching through the gaps, scraping off the skin from its claws, exposing fresh red flesh underneath. Its fingers twisted and groped in the air. My rational mind told me it couldn't hurt me through the bars, but fear had taken over my brain, leaving me paralyzed by the horrific scene. I didn't notice my cell door opening until the zombie suddenly shifted its attention, glaring at the guard who had just entered along with a tall, muscular man. He had a buzz cut, a square jaw, and almost no neck, muscles bulging under his uniform, with a prominent star on his collar. He glanced at the zombie and drawled, "I'll deal with you later, now let me talk to this civilian." Then, turning to me and squinting, he said, "Today's been a mess. The facility's compromised, and I'm shutting it down and wiping it clean, like we were never here. If anyone leaks to the media, well. As for you, we found your phone at the scene. Techs have unlocked the videos, which means you know too much. You and your girlfriend need to be dealt with." "She's not my girlfriend," I managed to say before pain shot through my shoulder. Looking down, I saw a syringe stuck in my shoulder, and the cell began to spin, my vision blurring. I could barely keep my eyes open, my mind a chaotic mess, not knowing where I was or how I got here. Rubbing my eyes, my vision cleared to see Beth lying next to me. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but the surroundings cruelly reminded me this was a waking nightmare. Beth opened her eyes, rubbed her forehead, and groaned hoarsely, "Damn it, I got your text after work saying the area was safe and that you needed help at the fire tower." I rushed over, but the soldiers grabbed me and injected something. I echoed her curses, "It's a trap. They must have used my phone. They're experimenting with zombies, Beth. They think you know the truth, so they want to cover it up." She sat up, her voice firm, "We can't get out." At that moment, I couldn't help but feel drawn to Beth's determination, maybe because of hormones, the craziness of the day, or whatever they injected us with. I had to tell her I liked her. I started, "Beth, She interrupted, "Do you smell that?" I focused and smelled something burning. Beth immediately got up, heading towards the railing, and I followed. Looking down, we both gasped. The fire tower's base was on fire, flames engulfing the support legs, the ladder already burned away. "Call 911, Beth said, reaching into her back pocket, her face falling. "Damn, the soldiers took my phone. They've trapped us, trying to make our deaths look like an accident," I added, feeling sparks burn my cheeks. The fire would reach the platform in minutes. Despair washed over me, tears streaming down as I heard wood cracking and faint sirens in the distance. Beth heard them too, excitedly shouting, "It's Mike. He must have seen the fire and called the fire department." Her words gave me hope, and I shouted, "We're saved." Beth and I high-fived, our excited voices echoing amid the fire's roar. Suddenly, a loud noise came from below, and the platform shook violently, almost throwing me off. "The support legs are giving way," Beth screamed. The sirens grew louder, but even if the fire trucks arrived in 30 seconds, it wouldn't be enough. Just then, I saw a vehicle burst out of the forest, screeching to a halt in front of the tower. Mike jumped out and ran towards the fire, but the flames prevented him from getting close. Despair spread through me. It seemed no one could save us in time. At that desperate moment, I heard a helicopter's blades whirring and turned sharply. A helicopter bearing the fire department's insignia hovered above, rescuers quickly descending on ropes. Within seconds, they reached the platform, securing a safety harness on Beth and swiftly hoisting her up. I watched her ascend from the trumbull. A few weeks ago, I noticed some strange things happening on my farm. At first, it was just minor stuff. Bales of hay would mysteriously move, and every morning when I woke up, they seemed to be farther from the house. I thought it was just some bored pranksters, and I was determined to catch those little brats one day. Every morning, I'd find the hay bales had shifted a bit, slowly moving away from the house as if dragged by an invisible hand. It seemed odd, but I didn't think much of it, assuming it was the local kids trying to scare me. A week went by, and the hay bales were almost at the edge of the farm. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to move them back myself. It took me a whole hour to move all the hay bales back near the house, each step fueled by my growing anger. By then, I was nearly mad with rage, imagining how I'd punish those pranksters. As I moved the hay bales, I cursed those troublemakers, picturing them getting caught. The next morning, I felt like my world had collapsed when I found all my horses decapitated. A foul stench woke me up, and each horse lay headless by its stable. The scene was gruesome, with blood everywhere and a horrible smell, like a massacre. I spent the whole day cleaning up the mess and carefully burying the remains. My anger turned to fear and sorrow, and I had no idea what was happening. But I knew I couldn't sit back anymore. I had to find out the truth and protect my farm. After cleaning everything up, I noticed the hay bales had returned to their previous positions, as if they'd never been moved. This time, they were spread out in the field, forming a specific pattern, like some kind of ritual. I decided that night I would catch whoever was behind this. I sat on the porch with my shotgun, a pot of coffee on the table, ready to stay up all night. The night was deep, and the only sound was the wind rustling the leaves. I gripped my shotgun tightly, never taking my eyes off the field. In the middle of the night, I heard a noise in the woods and quickly grabbed my shotgun, my heart racing. In the darkness, a large shadow silently crept into my field. This creature was much bigger than I imagined. Even hunched over, it stood at least 10 feet tall. Watching it was like seeing a hungry beast. Each step it took was heavy with menace, as if even the air trembled. It easily lifted each hay bale, carefully placing it farther away. Its movements were cautious, stopping now and then to look around before continuing. It seemed to know everything around it, acting with extreme caution as if carrying out an important task. Though it was lean, there was no doubt it was incredibly strong. In the creature's sunken chest, I saw eyes that glowed like an insect's, chilling even in the dark. Its eyes emitted a faint light, sending a shiver down my spine. I held my breath, not daring to make a sound, afraid it would notice me. After finishing its task, the creature glanced at my house. I froze, unsure if it had seen me. It then cautiously retreated into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. An hour later, I finally found the courage to move and hurried back inside. That night, I couldn't sleep until the first light of dawn. In the following days, the hay bales stayed put. They weren't randomly scattered, but marked an invisible boundary, trapping me inside. I tried to understand this boundary and the creature's purpose. Whenever I tried to cross that invisible line, I felt an unseen force stopping me. I started plotting ways to escape, but each time I was pushed back by that strong oppressive feeling. I felt like a bird trapped in a cage, with no way out. One morning, a car drove towards my farm, filling me with a desperate hope. Since seeing that creature, I had wanted to escape, but walking out wasn't an option. Whoever was in that car, as long as they stopped, I'd jump into the passenger seat and make them drive away immediately. No matter how dangerous the road ahead, I had to try to escape. As the car got closer, my hope grew. But my plan was shattered before I could act. As the car crossed the boundary marked by the hay bales, a loud noise erupted from the woods. The creature suddenly leaped out, running towards the car like a hunting leopard. Within seconds, it was on the car, tearing it apart like paper, trying to get to the driver. The driver's screams drowned out the sound of metal and glass breaking. The screams echoed in the night, chilling to the bone. I stood at a distance, barely able to believe what I was seeing. Eventually, the creature crushed the driver's chest with its massive claws, and the screams stopped abruptly. It tossed the driver's body aside like trash, then looked at me again, its gaze filled with cold hostility and warning, sending a chill down my spine. In the daylight, I saw clearly that the creature was made of some horrifying living substance, insect-like material tightly woven together, barely forming a human shape. Whatever it was, its surface looked smooth and hard. If not for seeing it move, I'd have thought it was made of granite. The creature's very existence was a paradox and a horror. The creature retreated to the woods, leaving me in shock. I stared blankly at the car, its engine still sputtering, parked between two hay bales. Suddenly, I understood its message. I was its prisoner, and no visitors were allowed. Nothing could cross the boundary it had set. I was trapped here by this creature, and its only demand was that I never leave. This realization nearly broke me, feeling my freedom completely stripped away, leaving only endless fear and despair. Though trapped, I wasn't sure if I could bear being this creature's captive. I kept thinking, especially after witnessing it brutally kill the driver. If I tried to cross the hay bale boundary, it might crush my skull before I could raise my hands in defense. It would find a new pet and repeat the process until it found one that could endure its constant watch. My heart was filled with fear and helplessness, but I knew escaping was my only hope. I had been pondering for days what to do. This terrifying place, this prison made of hay bales, and the creature, nearly broke my spirit. But maybe I should take the risk and escape this cursed land. As the sun set, the sky turned blood red. I took one last look at my farm, a place that had given me so many memories. A decision sprouted in my heart, live or die. I had to choose. I stood up and walked towards the boundary of hay bales. This was a gamble, a final attempt for freedom. With each step, I prayed the creature wouldn't notice me. With my heart pounding, I walked forward, filled with hope and fear. I knew this was my last chance. No matter the outcome, I had to try. As the sky darkened, I quickened my pace, racing against time. I could feel my heart beating as if it would burst from my chest. Crossing that line meant freedom, staying meant death. Diary. October 1st. Today, I received an unusual invitation from my old friend, Peter Stone. Peter, an amateur occult enthusiast, invited me to participate in a seance hosted by him. Although I have strong faith in science, I've always been intrigued by the psychological mechanisms behind these so-called spirit summonings. So, I decided to accept the invitation, thinking I might find some interesting material for my research. October 3rd. Tonight, a group of us gathered at Peter's old mansion in the suburbs. The house had a musty, damp smell, and the dim lighting added a touch of mystery. Joining the seance were Peter's wife, Catherine, a quiet and shy young girl named Lucy, and an older gentleman, Henry Harris. Peter stood before us, his face a mix of nervousness and excitement. On the center of the dining table was an old wooden Ouija board, surrounded by some rune-inscribed candles. "Tonight, we will attempt to contact the spirits," Peter began, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Please focus your minds and do not be afraid." As a psychologist, I knew Peter hoped to evoke certain emotions and responses from our subconscious through these mystical interactions, which was exactly what intrigued me. October 4th. The seance began. We sat around the table as Peter chanted some unknown incantations. The candle flames flickered, and the room's temperature seemed to drop. I couldn't help but shiver, though I kept reminding myself that it was just psychological suggestion. Suddenly, the Ouija board started to quiver. Catherine gasped, and Henry loudly questioned Peter if he was playing a trick. Sweat beaded on Peter's forehead, though his hands didn't touch the board. The board began to spin faster, seemingly propelled by some invisible force. Lucy looked on the verge of tears, wanting to flee, but Peter persuaded her to stay. My logical mind suggested it might be some magnetic device or fine thread, but I wanted to see more to verify my hypothesis. At that moment, the board suddenly flew off the table, piercing Henry's right hand. He let out a pained scream, blood oozing between his fingers. We were all too frightened to move, and Henry yelled, "Peter, what have you done?" October 10th. Since that night, Peter's mansion has not been the same. Strange symbols began appearing on the walls, sometimes in blood red, other times in black ink. The food in the kitchen spoiled at an alarming rate, as if the air was filled with decay. At night, everyone heard whispers and footsteps. I tried to analyze these phenomena, attributing them to collective anxiety or critical suggestion. But deep down, there was a nagging unease that kept me from sleeping well. Peter's mental state deteriorated. He claimed to see the dead and constantly repeated the numbers 7, 4, 5. His wife Catherine grew more haggard with fear, and Lucy often screamed from nightmares, eventually being sent home immediately. I decided to talk to Peter face to face, hoping to help him confront his fears and find the source of these happenings. October 15th. Peter agreed to my suggestion to conduct a well-prepared seance to uncover the truth behind the mysterious phenomena. That night, only Peter, a more fearful Catherine, and I stayed in the mansion. We sat around the table as usual, and Peter began chanting again. The candle flames danced, and the air felt dense. This time, the Ouija board remained still. However, Peter's voice grew deeper, as if coming from an abyss. His eyes glinted maliciously as he shouted, 7, 4, 5, reveal yourself. In an instant, the board soared from the table, striking Peter in the chest. He fell back, writhing in pain. I rushed to help, but an immense force knocked me to the ground. Peter laughed maniacally, black blood gushing from his mouth, his body contorted unnaturally. This was no longer a natural phenomenon, an evil force controlled him. I felt an unprecedented fear, unable to rationalize it with science. Catherine screamed, pleading for me to save Peter. Overcoming my terror and confusion, I stood up and made a final attempt. I shouted, "Stop! We refuse to participate any longer." October 16th. Peter's body finally lay still, leaving only a cold corpse on the ground. I felt guilt and helplessness. Perhaps I should never have participated in this game. Catherine broke down in tears, and I tried to comfort her, my heart filled with complex emotions. We decided to leave the house immediately, but that night, the terrible whispers still lingered in my ears, keeping me awake. Later, I reported the incident to the local police, but no explanation could convince them. Peter's death was ruled as sudden cardiac arrest, and the case was quickly closed. November 5th. After leaving Peter's mansion, I tried to avoid the topic and push it out of my mind, returning to my quiet psychological research. However, those terrifying memories, Peter's pained expression, and the constant whispering of the numbers 7, 4, 5 continued to torment me. Months later, I began to notice strange phenomena. Countless nights, I heard footsteps outside my door, and blurry bloodstains appeared on the walls. I was forced to seek the truth again, no longer relying solely on scientific explanations. My career gradually fell apart because I could no longer focus on my work. Former research partners and friends distanced themselves from me, thinking I had lost my mind. December 20th. Years later, I moved to a remote village, living under an assumed name, trying to escape that invisible force. But those mysterious numbers and Peter's face always haunted my dreams, making it hard to let go. One day, a stranger came to my new home. He was a young researcher, curious about the Peter incident, wanting to learn more details from me. I refused him, but in his eyes, I saw my former self, the one filled with curiosity about the unknown and mysterious. After he left, I realized that this story would be passed down in some way. All I could do was advise future seekers never to touch the unknown lightly. The evil and horror might far exceed our understanding. My story ends here, but those resentments still lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Perhaps one day, the truth will be known to more people, but that day will likely be a nightmare for many. My name is John, and I live on a lone farm situated in a remote countryside, nestled far away from the nearest city. In the lush, grassy valley where my farm lies, it's surrounded by ridges adorned with oak and maple trees. Here, it feels like time stands still, and the hustle and bustle of city life is nothing but a distant memory. Last spring, my beloved wife passed away, leaving me and my son Peter alone to manage the farm. From that moment on, my world was shrouded in darkness, and nothing seemed to matter anymore. Peter used to be a bright and cheerful child, his laughter resonating throughout the house. His joy was infectious, bringing light into every corner of our life here. But after his mother's death, Peter's demeanor completely changed. He became withdrawn, his silence echoing through the emptiness of our home. He was somber every day, and his laughter was replaced by an unending gloom. As for me, I became someone I didn't recognize, angry and cruel, a far cry from the patient and gentle father I once prided myself on being. The days turned into months, especially that long, harsh winter, where our conversations dwindled into mere shadows of what they once were, leaving an air of loneliness and despair to settle in the house. Every night at dinner, Peter would break the deafening silence with his question, "Father, why do we live so far from the city?" Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a friend my age? But I never responded. I just sat there, silently eating my bread and butter, my heart heavy. The coldness in my demeanor cast a dark shadow over Peter's spirit, deepening his sadness. His plea for companionship was like a dagger to my soul, reminding me of how isolated and helpless we both felt. As the days dragged on, Peter's condition worsened. He became so weak that getting out of bed seemed like an impossible task. One morning, Peter didn't appear at the breakfast table, nor did he complete his morning chores. I felt a surge of anger, ready to reprimand him for his negligence. As I grabbed the belt off the wall and stomped towards his bed, my fury overshadowed my common sense. When I reached his bedside and saw him, my heart almost shattered. Peter's face was as white as a ghost. In that instant, my rage dissipated entirely. The belt slipped from my grasp, its rusty buckle clanging against the wooden floor, echoing my shock. Seeing his fragile state, touching his cold forehead, a wave of sorrow and regret engulfed me. Promising not to be cruel anymore, I resolved to take him to the city to find a doctor who could help my ailing son. Despite my best efforts, no doctor was willing to travel to such a remote area. Just as I was about to give up and seek out more doctors, a chance encounter with a sign changed everything: kittens, free to a good home. Instantly, I felt a glimmer of hope. I knew what I had to do. Bringing a small black kitten home, I placed it by Peter's bed. To my relief, a smile returned to Peter's face, the first I had seen in months. He named the kitten Tom, in honor of his late grandfather. From that moment onward, Tom became an indispensable part of our lives. Peter and Tom became almost inseparable, the kitten's presence providing a much-needed comfort for my son. "Come on, Tom," Peter would call out, "it's time to milk the cows." Tom would scurry over, his tail twitching with joy. Wherever Peter ventured on the farm, Tom followed closely, their bond unbreakable. Time seemed to fly, and spring came again. One evening, Tom vanished. A sense of unease crept over me, gnawing at my peace of mind. The following morning, I discovered 3 chickens dead, their feathers scattered across the ground like a grim warning. Controlling my simmering anger, I thought of the promise I had made to my son. I told Peter, "You know I love you. But if Tom kills another chicken, he can't stay." Peter, though distressed, nodded in agreement. Tom, seemingly unaware of the gravity of the situation, purred contentedly in his arms. The very next night, Tom disappeared once again. The morning light revealed a devastating scene: 3 more dead chickens, their feathers spread across our yard like a macabre blanket. Taking a deep breath to calm my rising frustration, I saw Peter sitting on the porch, the killer cat lounging lazily in his arms, its belly unnaturally full. My anger reignited. Walking up to Peter, I said sternly, "You know, I've told you before, Tom has to go if this happens again." Peter still didn't look up, just nodding silently. Tom continued to purr in his arms, oblivious to the turmoil around him. While Peter slept that night, I decided to take the matter into my own hands. Quietly, I took Tom to the city, crossing the river and walking through the woods. Far from our home, I released Tom and turned back, leaving him behind in the dim light. Tom sat there, pawing at the ground, his eyes fixed on me. Returning home before dusk, I was stunned to see Peter on the porch with Tom still sleeping in his lap, as though he had never left. My mind struggled to process the scene before me. What came first was confusion, followed swiftly by fury. The promise I made to myself years ago about being a good father seemed like a distant memory now. "My child," I said harshly, "if Tom kills another chicken, he will be put in a bag full of stones and drowned in the river. Peter, his eyes filled with fear, looked down at his boots and nodded. Tom, as always, purred contentedly in his arms. The following day brought tragedy once more. 9 chickens were found dead, feathers strewn in a grotesque display. My anger surged beyond control. Storming into Peter's room, I seized Tom from the foot of his bed, bundled him into an old sack, and drove straight to the city. I parked by the river, collected several large stones, and secured them to the sack containing Tom. Without a second thought, I tossed the bag into the water. Watching it sink, I turned away. When I returned home before dark, Peter was sitting on the porch again, with Tom, completely drenched, licking his paws. There was no doubting it, it was Tom. This was the final straw. "My child," I declared, "that cat must love you very much, but it belongs in a bag full of stones, buried in a 3-foot grave where it will stay." Peter, his spirit crushed, nodded while stroking Tom, who purred softly. Determined to end the cycle once and for all, I gave Peter an axe. "Take this," I ordered, "and bury him in the woods. It's got to be done." Peter reluctantly took the axe, picked up Tom, and walked despondently into the woods. Finding a large stone, he placed Tom upon it, tears streaming down his face. With a heavy heart, he swung the axe, severing Tom's head. Pale and grief-stricken, he slowly dragged the axe back home. On the porch, we sat in silence. The weight of the past days hung heavily between us. Neither of us spoke, rocked silently by the gentle creak of the porch swing. Suddenly, Peter jumped up, a glimmer of panic in his voice. "Father, look! Tom is back." Raising my eyes to the road, I saw the impossible, Tom, soaked to the bone, coming out of the woods, carrying his own head in his mouth. This slow and heavy narrative highlights a father's relentless cruelty and a son's helplessness, emphasizing the tale of the extraordinary, undying cat, Tom. I hope you find this extended version of the story equally compelling. So that's the whole story. Despite reports from 100 years ago and recent research, the mystery of the forgotten house remains unsolved. What do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more creepy stories.